how we understand that we started?
We have no signal. Just to begin to start on time. It's 6 already, so it's okay, I think.
Anya, we don't hear you. We can't hear.
It's like now.
Oh, nice.
10 seconds ago.
So, okay, hello everyone. Let's start. Our talk is a part of the series of nomadic discussions called Integrating Multitudes, dedicated to labor issues and possibility of uniting independent cultural workers. And we have already had talks with co-organizers of May Congress of Art Workers in Russia. We had talk with the Union on Pinchuk Art Center of mediators from Ukraine. We have talked with Art Leaks, and today our guests are representatives of Association of Independent Performing Arts from Berlin, and they are Thomas Fabian Eder. He's an independent art manager and researcher based in Berlin. He's developed a distribution and marketing office and thereafter took international relationships on the Performing Art Festival. And since 2019, he conducts a doctorate research concerning the organizational structure and participatory governments in the field of independent performing art in Europe, in collaboration with the European Association for Independent Performing Arts and the Ludwig Maximilian University Munich. And our guest also, Daniel Brunet. He's a director, performer, producer, and translator, and artistic director of the English Theatre in Berlin, and also representative of Coalition of the Independent Arts. Today we are here thanks to the Stanislavski Electrotheatre and Kristina Matvienko. Kristina is a theater expert and curator. She will share the overview on Russian independent performance art scene today. And my name is Darья Yurychuk. I'm a part of the media activist group Café-morоженое, questioning working conditions in art, academia, and activism in post-Soviet region. And my colleague today, Alexei Kochanov. He works both in Moscow and Berlin, and he will help me today with moderation. And I would like him to ask him to introduce the initiatives that he participating now in Moscow.
Yeah, so I'm also part of initiative group to make independent performers, independent performance artists, a union. So we still like we're in discussion about the form of it, and is it association or it's a union? On my opinion, it should be union. And there is some activities that we actually started from. First, it was like this letter to the government that's still on actually. Yes, and people can also. It's a petition that's still I think on to support. Then also we made the Facebook group Artists on Fire. This is kind of like free market where like there is people who do something for money or people who need to be done something for money. So that's shortly, and then we met with Dasha and Café-mороженое, and the idea was like to popularize these talks and just to open the discussion, because many people don't really know what's union and if we need to collaborate and don't know about solidarity. I don't know if it's important or not. Yeah.
Okay, let's move to our questions. We would like to ask representatives of Association of Independent Performing Arts in Berlin how it was started, and when, who, and how LAFT has been created, in what context.
Maybe I start, Daniel, and you are just feel free to engage anytime you feel that you can add something, or when I'm saying something wrong to your opinion. But I'm going to try not to. So the Association for Independent Performing Arts in Berlin is about 10, almost 11 years old now. Started in 2009. And back then it was a group of theater makers, a mixture of producers, artists, people who ran independent venues, who felt that there is a need for political representation. They understood that they are all doing something together, that they're in a common enterprise in one way or another, and that what they're doing seems relevant and important, both locally, but also nationally and internationally. But the conditions under which they were doing it were not right. If what they were doing is important to a society, then there should be a certain status of living. It was not right to work for €2 an hour. It was not right to constantly exploit yourself in order to put something on stage. It was not right to work 5 jobs at the same time in order to be able to produce your art. And this is why they said, okay, regardless of our differences concerning aesthetics or other things, what we're doing is theater. We are trying to work on our society by self-empowering us as citizens, and we try to start a communication. So let's just unite. Let us unite, because the more we are, the stronger we will be. And especially if we are organized well, people are going to be able to speak to us. I think this is like it in a nutshell. There were just many needs, and also the timing was right. For many years, the independent scene was viewed in opposition to the state theaters as something different, and they started out as something different. They were a counter movement. They said, we don't want this. We do not want to have top-down hierarchies. We do not want to do plan 4 years in advance. We do not want to work with a fixed ensemble. We want to be free in the way we produce. And so for a long time, they've been seen as the school for the real theaters, as the little brother, kind of smiled at, not taken way too serious. And that was the point in time where they realized, hey, we are the ones touring internationally. We are the ones who are coming up with the innovative ideas, opening the fourth wall, working with experts of reality, doing documentary things, and so on. So they kind of gained a new Selbstbewusstsein. Help me, Daniel. What's
self-confidence?
A new self-confidence, and said, let's do this. Does this answer your question?
Thank you, Daniel. Maybe you would add something.
Sure. It's been a very exciting development, having 2 very different approaches to the performing arts. And one of the stories of the independent performing arts community is also a story of increasing professionalization, with the development of an aesthetic that goes hand in hand with the development of an understanding of post-dramatic theater. And I don't think it's too much of an accident that now we have an older generation, a generation older than Thomas or myself, people who have been working together continuously for well over 25 years. And I'm thinking of Shishi Pop, I'm thinking of Gob Squad, I'm thinking of Rimini Protocol, And all three of these groups are groups that have toured around the entire world in festivals and whose work is somehow accessible and tourable in a way that only a handful of German Stadt- und Staatstheater directors are. Thomas Ostermeier may tour around the world, but Frank Kastorf never did, Klaus Peimann never did, and these three different groups also don't work from plays. And so as that first generation moved from, and I think it's also no accident that these groups all emerged from the Institute for Applied Theater Studies in Gießen, where the theory of post-dramatic theater was first started, which basically means, in many ways, non-play-based theater, and in certain ways, non-narrative-based theater, but using the encounter between artists and audience in a fixed place to maybe do something slightly different than just have the audience sit and reverently stare forward while in a darkened room. And as those groups were willing in their early 20s to perhaps work for €2 an hour, build their shows after earning their daily bread with regular 9-to-5 jobs, they made it into their 30s, their 40s. Some of them started families. Others wanted to have more stability. They began to think about retirement. And certainly the artists in these groups aren't acting alone. There are certainly everybody else around them. The performing arts are collaborative. So managers, producers, administrative people, tour organizers, and everyone said, we need to have a different kind of community. And we operate from a place of extreme privilege in Germany. We have a government, especially in the state of Berlin, that is fully committed to providing millions and millions and millions of euros to have professional institutions that can pay living wages. And so in 2007, when a number of leaders of the community came together to form LAFT, what that did was create a professional advocacy group that could speak to the Senate that governs Berlin with one voice. And that actually made things much easier for the Senate, who is interested in supporting this community professionally, and in turn helped the community a lot because it could come to agreements amongst itself and its chosen representatives could stand and speak for everybody.
But maybe just to answer the question very concrete, it all started in the living room of Eva Karen Tittmann, because you asked where it started. It was these groups, representatives from the groups Daniel mentioned, and one other very important collective to mention is called Ehrliche Arbeit, which is a feminist producers collective. And people from those groups, they sat on the carpet in a floor and started to talk about what can we do to better our situation. It's shit.
Whoa, thank you. My next question is about to clarify how this Freie Bühne, am I right? Independent theater scene, what it consists of. Is that consists of contemporary dance performers, different kinds of, I don't know, artists, or maybe institutions who are those artists work with governmental theater or with independent platforms or with museums or institutions of contemporary arts, or maybe they are musicians and they work with I don't know, independently. What the structure of this independent scene?
It gets a little confusing because both the state and municipal theaters, the large repertory and ensemble theaters, as well as nearly everyone within our independent arts community, it's all state funding. It's earmarked in the sense that the Deutsches Theater has its own position in the line item of the city of Berlin's government, and its money is there every year. In our performing arts community, an institution the size of the Sophiensäle, which has a budget of around 2.5 million euros a year, it still has to apply for that money every 4 years. And there's certainly a chance, I'd like to think a very small chance, but it's still a chance that maybe the jury that year of the application would decide not to fund it. So we have small amounts of funding horizons, and we basically have projects that are funded on a year-to-year or a 2-year or a 4-year basis. Germany has 16 federal states. The two of us, I think, or at least myself, I'm most familiar with the structures within the city-state of Berlin. And there are pools of money for the visual arts, for literature, for various kinds of music. The money for the performing arts and dance are together, and the communities are closely linked, but there is still a separate association. Zeitgenössisches Tanz Berlin, the Contemporary Dance Berlin Association, that also represents the interests of people in the dance community, choreographers, dancers. Many people are members of both associations. So both things come from the state, but it's different sets of money. And each of the genres speaks with members of the Cultural Senate that defines the budget, administers the programs, hires the juries that give out the money based on the applications. And the Coalition of the Independent Arts has representatives, delegates from each of the major associations. And we generally meet on a bi-weekly basis to consider issues that affect the entire arts community, not simply individually dance or performing arts or visual arts.
But, you know, if you ask who are the independent performing arts, this is a question that is very hard to answer. Also in scientific literature, you will not find one definition. It's not a question of aesthetics, doesn't matter what you do. It's not a question of genre. It's contemporary circus, dance, and speech theater, children and youth theater, all these belong to it. But it's a question of form. It's a question of how do you work, not what do you do. So who are the independent performing arts? It's people who are working self-empowered, freelance, who say, I do this and I do this on my own, and I find a way to survive with it. Actually, the European Association for Independent Performing Arts has tried to formulate a definition of what it is. And I'd like to read it out one time because I just found it. Maybe that helps. So the independent performing arts community is a designation which includes the totality of all professional, freelance, and that is important, theater makers, artists, ensembles, but also independent institutions and structures working in the genres of dance, theater, performance, music theater, children and youth theater, as well as overall interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary work. So it's you can't really put a name on it and say it's just those who are doing contemporary performance. And this is what I said in the beginning. It's important to also grab it wide and try to be inclusive and have as many people with you as possible if you want to make a political difference in a democratic European state. And this is one question I have towards you, because the structures in Russia are very different than the structures in Germany, and I do not know how applicable the models of lobbying we are using are in your environment.
Christina.
Yes.
Maybe you will add something.
Yes, this is the most important question for our independent artists, because we have limited sources of this financial, because most of our theaters are state, and they have this financial support from the state, from the Ministry of Culture, and only, I'm not sure, probably 5% of our theater, or even less, try to apply, for example, for money from the funds there are some funds and probably 3 big, but the rest are forbidden because they have this, like British Council, for example, they have this forbiddance for activity in Russia after Ukrainian war, probably, or before, I don't remember, but now they are stopped. Or fond of Ford. They were very important for independent artists because they support multicultural or multidisciplinary projects and experimental forms of art. But now Fond Ford or Soros, for example, are forbidden. So we have probably 3. Yes, I know Prokhorov Fund, but doesn't matter for you. And you may apply for the grant and get some money for the project. And even you have this right for applying for the grant of Ministry of Culture or Department of Culture of the city, I mean, or Theater Union. We have this very old organization from the Soviet time. Now they, I would say, quite renovated, and they set a lot of these projects. Not a lot, Dasha, but some of them. But in this case, we have some restriction.
Do you have a good relationship to the union of to the Russian Theater Union? Does the independent scene and the Russian Theater Union have a good? Are they working closely together?
Yes, they have even the festival, which includes some independent theater from regions, especially.
Where they all come to Moscow and they
yes,
meet.
Exactly, on September.
Okay.
But in this case, you have some restrictions concerning political agenda, or how to say, some questions which are not so available in our artistic space. It's not forbidden openly, but you know, of course, that it couldn't be supported. If you, I don't know, would like to say something.
Just for you to know, we 2 years ago, I think, we had a collaboration with the Russian Theater Union, and they sent a group of Russian theater experts to come and see the independent performing arts festival, the Performing Arts Festival in Berlin, as a group of delegates trying to get an insight on what is happening in the contemporary world in Berlin. So that's just a fun fact. I think it's interesting that that they're interested in knowing about it.
And they heard about this trip.
They had a trip, yes.
Yeah. But I don't know what were the circumstances of this trip, but the trip was good.
Yeah.
Yes, but for example, yesterday, independent theater from Rostov-na-Donu was closed, 18 plus. It was the small stage in the center of the city. And they have support from this man who just like contemporary art, not from the state. So they were closed because this pandemic was so difficult for them. Now they closed. They are closed. So I would like to say that we have very, how to say, just a few of these independent companies through the country. But from the other side, I would say that in St. Petersburg now, a lot of very small companies who prefer not to be in the relationships with the state, and they are independent, especially in contemporary dance. Darya, am I right?
Yeah, we have some different types of independent companies, I guess. But and we also have. I'm one. I feel like I'm a part of the community of contemporary dancers who are trying to do something individually. But actually, I'm not sure that you can fully financialize. I don't know. You have no budgets to create something individually. You need to be a small institution, NKO, or maybe now you can be, this year you can be individual entrepreneur to apply for not governmental, but one of the grants that that can provide you funds for production. But there are very few of them. And also speaking of the union that we have, the theater union, this is have very have some restrictions to people that can participate, that you have to have special education that I haven't actually. No, am I right, Christina? I'm not really sure.
I'm not sure because we apply for documentary puppet show about this shaman from Yakutia. You know, he was imprisoned.
Yeah.
The man who crossed crossed the country for achieving Moscow and protesting against the authorities. We applied and we got it. Theater Doc, it's independent structure, and this guy hasn't any professional education, so I'm not sure. But they got the grant from STD, from Theater of Union. Yes, Theater Union.
Okay, so they have a grant as well. For me, you know, you ask how was the situation before the association in Berlin started, and the one thing was, of course, that you looked at your own situation and you understood something needs to change, but there was also a social context that was quite relevant. It was the 2000s in Berlin. After the wall came down, many people left the city. Rents were very cheap because so many people have left Berlin. On the one hand, on the other hand, there were loads of abundant spaces and places and buildings. So it became a mecca for artists. And suddenly more and more people came and were working in the city, but the budgets, they didn't rise and there was not enough funding to apply for. And this is a very big disbalance that used to be huge, that still is huge because there's still coming artists to Berlin. And yes, the budgets rise, but not enough in comparison to the amount of people we have who produce. And this is something I'm interested in, like how it is in Moscow and St. Petersburg. I know you say there is a handful of grants, but like how many people are actually, like, how much of the need is covered by those grants? How many artists are there, and are they close to sufficient? Do they support 5% of what's there? Do they not make a difference at all? Like, what is and how is life as an artist in those cities, and how can you support yourself? Because
the most expensive thing is how to cover the rent of the building or the space. It's the most expensive thing in Moscow, I mean, and less expensive in St. Petersburg and less expensive in Novosibirsk or Yekaterinburg. And I know that a lot of these people have very limited fee, and they are ready to отказаться, забыла. Not get the salary or the fee. Regret from the fee, because they would like to realize the project and to buy, for example, something for the props or to pay for the rent of the space. So usually are quite poor, I would say.
What do you mean by regret from the fee? I'm not sure I understand what you mean.
When the artist is ready to regret from his fee for himself.
He will not take the money himself.
Yes.
Okay, self-exploitation, huge problem.
Yeah. But this is the only chance if you would like to do something, and in this case they are ready to not get money from this grant. You know, it's very limited. I don't know, for example, 100 rubles, is it big, or 300 rubles? 300 тысяч grant, например. 300 rubles for the production. You can buy something or you can pay for. I know from Theater Dog the situation of Theater Dog quite well. They have this rent for every month, about 300 rubles. So all this grant will be spent for covering this demand, and the rest money they should get from the tickets. But the tickets shouldn't be very high in this independent theater. So it's how to say, замкнутый круг, closed ring, and yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's a vicious circle, which is
yes, exactly. Yeah.
In our very privileged community as well. Even the theaters, and within the 4-year funding program, the 2 best funded theaters are the Sophiensäle and the Neuköllner Oper, both of which receive about 2.5 million euros a year from the city. Neither of them have a sufficient production budget. They can keep their doors open. They can pay their staff. They can even formally employ many people. The Sophiensäle has nearly 20 formal employees who receive health insurance, retirement insurance, and all the requisite benefits. But what they can't do is they can't turn to an outside group of artists and say, we would like you to create this content for us. Here's 50,000 euros. Here's 100,000 euros. Here's everything you need to do a professional production. My small institution, we receive 150,000 euros a year. We have no employees. We are all freelancers. We receive a monthly fee. We have no production budget. We can cover our rent. When we can sell 100 tickets a night or 120 tickets a night, and we can sell drinks at a bar, sometimes we can keep our budget mostly balanced. Many years, we end the year in a loss, and the people who operate the theater often have to go without their fee 1 or 2 months a year. On Tuesday, it's the big grant deadline for the individual project funding, which for the majority of artists in our community is the one chance a year to get a budget for a production. I'm estimating that there will be even more applications than ever before this year, because I don't know, it seems like everyone has had just a little bit more time on their hands. I don't know why. It will be at least 450 applications for about 30 funded projects. These production budgets will range from between about 15,000 to about 75,000. And it also gets tricky because then you do start to get into issues of sustainability and impact and efficacy. And a long run in our community is 4 performances. Most theaters with a half a budget, will run a show exactly 4 times. They will hope to fill their auditorium. Many can't. And then they will take that show away and put up another one because they cannot, like say the US American model, where you open a show and you run it. I mean, the Broadway model, of course, is 8 shows a week for as long as you can make money doing it. The off-Broadway model is 6 to 8 shows a week for at least 6 weeks. At my small theater, if we have a full production, sometimes we'll run it 12 times because we don't have the money. We can't afford the technicians to take it down and put something else back up. So we hope that we can key into a certain community that will come and support it. So these are the very real growing pains that we're going through as a community right now. Because if you look back, our funding programs grew out of West Berlin. West Berlin, of course, was an island in the middle of the German Democratic Republic. It was relatively difficult to get in and out, and there were huge amounts of subsidies. And one form of subsidy, of course, was supporting independent private theaters. when the wall came down, those programs continued. And by the time that 2007 rolled around and LAFT was founded, there were all sorts of new institutions that had never been there before. So it's something that we continue to face, because the city has been very good about increasing the amount of money available each year and the ways it has been available each year, but it's nowhere close to meeting the demand, which, and this is the last branch of this thought, it does raise the other question: how do you sustainably, fairly, and equitably determine who is supported and who isn't? Should every single person who says, I'm an independent artist and I would like this money because this is how I want to earn my living. I live in capitalism, unfortunately, the same as you do. This is what I need to pay the rent of my apartment. This is what I need to buy groceries. It gets very, very tricky. And we in LAFT and we in the coalition are simply trying to help the city understand how we can support everyone as sustainably as possible.
Yeah.
May I ask the question?
Yes, sure.
Am I right? But it seems to me that for example, or for other European authorities, it's quite important to give money to independent artists. I mean, it's in their mission or their aims. I mean, in all. But for your authorities, is it important to support independent artists, and for what? What is the aim backstage?
I can answer some of it. You know, it's not like that somebody in the government sits there and thinks, yes, of course we should support independent performing arts because it's so great, and it's made itself such big of a name. It's the other way around. You form lobby groups in order to tell the people why it is important for them to support it. Only if they believe the arguments you tell them, and if the arguments you tell them are valid, you have a chance to go forward. And if you ask about Europe, it's largely different in Europe. It's been a fight, and that in all of the countries, and that fight started in the early 70s in Sweden, but it took a long time before they had a fairly developed funding system. In Germany, it started in the 80s. In Bulgaria, for example, they're having a lot of communication with the government now, but they just started in the 2000s after the war. You know, there was a big change in 1989 that made that first possible. And so on. So no, I don't think it is important per se for a European government to support independent performing arts. I also think the more right-leaning the government is, the more the less they want to support independent performing arts, because often the sector deals with issues of democracy, often it deals with issues of internationalization, often it deals with questions of humanitarianism, solidarity, and so on. And those are traditional left-leaning topics. This is one answer to the question. And so number one, you have to tell them why it's important. And there was the second part of the question: what are the arguments that work? And I think that is very different if you're from country to country, or in Germany even from state to state. In Berlin, like I said, the situation in the 90s and 2000 was the following. It was very poor. There was a lot of empty buildings. There were not many people coming to Berlin, many people with money leaving Berlin. And that's why all the others came. That's when Berlin started to build an image, being poor but sexy, being that place where everything is going on. And today, politicians in Berlin know, and that's also what we use as an argument, that the art scene is necessary for tourism. and the art scene is necessary for them to maintain their image as a modern, vibrant, and future-oriented city. And this works. And it's also true. I mean, discourse is created and the communications take place.
Yeah, and I can add to that a little bit. As I've said before, we're very privileged in Berlin, and we're privileged right now because in many ways, the argument between the so-called independent arts community and the establishment is in many ways similar to the arguments between so-called high culture and so-called low culture, or so-called mainstream culture and so-called alternative culture. And we are extremely fortunate. A great deal of my work deals with speaking not only with members of the cultural administration, but also members of the three governing political parties, those members of those parties who are dedicated to dealing with culture and cultural policy. And two of those three parties are intimately familiar with the independent arts, and they know what that means. And they understand that it's not amateur, that it's not less professional. They understand that in many ways, the independent arts deal very much with very, very, very important identity politics, all different forms of self-determination and self-expression. And they are, in fact, very much committed to not only preserving them, but to expanding them. When the current government came into power in 2016, a part of their coalition platform was to support and expand the funding of the independent arts. It doesn't mean that we don't disagree or butt heads, or that we, the advocates, don't demand more than they give us. But the very fact that they make time for us and sit down and talk with us and take our input into account feels like such a major victory. And it's truly night and day to talk with the two parties who understand what we are and what we're about than it is to talk with the third party, which seems to have absolutely no understanding of what the difference is between a play-based theater and a theater where pieces are post-dramatic and often serve to render communities that are otherwise invisible visible.
But you know, you say it feels like a victory, and I think it is. It's important also to remember that it's not only, of course, we are living in a privileged society when it comes to questions of democracy and human rights compared to some others, but it's something that we have worked for. It is something that was a strategic goal from the beginning, and that we have worked for. And the aim was always to try to encounter into a long-term dialogue with governments, city governments, and also governments on national and on European level. The European level, there's no long-term dialogue yet. But this is something that took a lot of effort and time, engaging all the members of our association, partly in trying to address politicians, writing many letters, going to office hours, sitting in plenary meetings. It's things where we always have showed ourselves and have told them over and over again, hey, we can do something for you. We are those people who are actually making that city attractive. We are the ones who are actually talking about things that are relevant to the citizens who are your voters, and so on. So it's, I think, approaching them, being seen, getting them to acknowledge the information you give them. This is the first part in governance, in the idea of NGOs and governments working together. The second part, and that is something that we have reached by now, is that they do not only read the newsletters we send them and inform themselves, but that they actually ask us. So the communication has turned around. It goes the other way around. When there is a new jury that needs to be put into place for a funding body or for a funding tool to be distributed, they say us, hey, make suggestion, who should be in the jury? Then once a year, for example, we do have something called the Funding Summit. So we invite all our members to come together and to discuss the existing funding tools in a collaborative process, with the end of having a paper that everybody of the association agrees on. And this paper we then take to the politicians and we say, here, that's what we need, that's what we want. We have figured that out together. And that's how you can help us. And they take it into account. And yes, this is because they trust us, and they trust us because we keep producing art, and because they are able to understand us as one community that has one person they can talk to. We are an association. We have that good old model with a changing board. Every year there are elections, other people are in the board. But that means if there's a board, you have somebody a politician can talk to. And that's incredibly valuable. Because otherwise you will have the one theater talking to them, then you will have the other theater talking to them. You will, 1,000 people trying to approach those politicians, and they do not know whom to trust and whom to favor over the other, and so on. So I think the first step is really to kind of organize your own house and make sure that you have a fair communication to one another, and that you have a common ground. That means, hey, we all need to be here. We all need to survive. I know we compete against each other, but we can only improve our situation if we stick together.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this was the reason why the association was founded in the very first place. And the situation I'm describing is already the product of some 13 years of establishment and hard work. And it's also very much a function of the direction in which the political winds are blowing. We happen to have a 3-party coalition right now with the two most liberal parties within Germany's political system. That certainly plays to our favor. And both of them, and those two parties also being relatively small and now getting the chance to be part of the leading governing coalition, that helps. If those winds blow in the opposite direction, in the right-hand direction, in the election next year, our community will be one of the first to suffer incredible setbacks. And it's exactly as Thomas says. You have to get your own house in order. And on the board, we constantly have to manage sub-interests against each other. And the way that we do that is by looking at it as a community as a whole, completely free from aesthetics or genres. So when we work to develop something, say the minimum fee limit, which has been a pretty major victory for the association. And in fact, it's now been expanded to cover other genres as well. But before that, there were no guidelines. What is the minimum fee? What is an hour of work worth? Is an hour of work for an actor worth more than an hour of work for a stage manager? What about an assistant? What about a director? And now we have, and frankly, it doesn't work perfectly. And frankly, if you apply it the way it's meant to be used, you make your grant so expensive that you will probably not get it in the amount, but it's still a better place than we were in 5, 6, 7 years ago. So it's in many ways as well, it's baby steps.
Should I try to explain that minimum fee one time so it's more understandable? Because before, the problem with the grants was what I had described earlier. Artists would cut out their own fee, or they would write in the budget, they would apply with a very small fee, so they have a bigger chance to go through, and then just work 10 or 15 times as much as they are paying themselves. And the minimum fee was, so the idea behind it is to say, okay, with the grant juries, they do not accept any projects where the budget shows that people are getting paid under a certain amount an hour and that the time is not realistic. And this minimum fee is, I don't know, it changes. In the beginning, it was €12.50 an hour, I think. and then you also have them for day and so on. But and now only an application is supported where people put in that amount of money to pay themselves and to pay the people who work with them.
Thank you for this topic, because I wanted to ask you about how this minimum fee limit works, and I want to clarify how to what you need to count for this fee as work hours, because there are a lot of work on stage, and there are also a lot of organizational work, such as writing letters, or I don't know, repetition hours and so on. How to understand how high they should be, because as for me, for example, there are my work is consisted with something that I need qualification for, my professional focus, and something that is about communication. Should it be counted differently, or how can you count it?
It generally divides into pre-production, production, and post-production, which apply most to administrators or, in many ways, project leads, like a director or a curator. It can also, for performers, for example, you can quantify that in rehearsal hours, and you can also quantify that into, say, a performance fee, a certain fee that you get each night or each day that you go on stage. Ours is quite complex, and it's in its infancy, and it is still evolving. You can figure it out either as a monthly flat fee. You can figure it out as an hourly fee. You can figure it out as a weekly fee. We also say there is a social insurance scheme that applies to freelance artists, and depending on whether an individual is covered by the so-called Künstlersozialkasse, that's one number. If they aren't, then it's a different, slightly higher number, because you know that they because all budgets, all artistic fees have to pay a certain percent into this artist insurance scheme. And for those individuals that aren't part of it, they get a slightly higher fee. One of the major evolutionary steps that's now under discussion is whether there should be a discrepancy in the fees based on experience. If you have, say, 0 to 10 years in the field, should you receive X amount of euros? But if you have, say, 10 to 20, is it Y? And if it's over 20, is it Z? That's something we haven't figured out yet. And we certainly, and we would really like to get to a point where these fee limits really do ensure that everyone's making the same amount of money. But the problem is the amount of funding available makes it almost impossible. And so it's better than it used to be, but it's still not a panacea. It's still not completely solved. And I mean, for example, the newcomers funding, the Einstiegsförderung, that's capped at 15,000 euros. And it's just about impossible unless they're all doing solo performances, but they direct or choreograph themselves and do all of the design work. It's just about impossible for a production of any particular size to professionally prepare and still meet these minimum fee limits with a 15,000 euro budget. They'll do better, and it's good that we have it, but the work, we still have a long way to go.
But it's a minimum, right? You are asking, is it different if I'm doing communication work or if I'm doing performance work? Because so what Daniel just explained is the discussions around it and the complexity that arises when you once start with this. But when we started, it was very simple. It said nobody should earn under 2,000 euros a month, no matter what you do. Nobody. and there's no difference between the technician or the curator. The minimum this person needs to earn is 2,000 euros a month. That doesn't mean that nobody can earn more. If you think your communication work is worth more than 2,000 a month, then you write that in your budget. Nobody stops you from putting in more, but you cannot put in less than that. And that is the basic idea. And today, the minimum fee is with 2,660 euros for those who do not get special social security treatment. Some artists get special social security treatment, then they get a little bit less for the minimum fee. And that's still the same. Everybody should get that amount. And if you have a project where you think, okay, I'm going to have a stage designer for 2 weeks, then you know it's half of those 2,660 I need to put in my budget for a minimum. If I'm going to work on it for 3 months, or I estimate I will work on it for 3 months, then you multiply it by 3. And if you think that my curatorial work is more, or my artistic work is worth more than the technical work, then you just put extra on top.
May I ask you, how did you achieve that these funds or authorities take seriously your demands? I mean, this minimal rate of the fee.
And I would like to add also, because we have a situation when people who want to participate theater, who are young, they like, it's damping. I don't know how it is in English. It's also damping. Yeah. So how you work with this?
Well, it's advocacy, and the thing of it is that funding for the independent performing arts did not emerge after the association came into being. It existed beforehand. And so when the association emerged, the cultural administrators were actually quite happy to have one entity to talk with that bundled the interests, had the legitimation of the community, and spoke to them with one voice. And particularly, as you know, the entire 20 years I've been in Berlin, we've always had liberal administrations, always run by politicians, by political parties that are at the very least in the center left, if not further. And so issues such as a minimum wage and affordable wages are very near and dear to their hearts and their programs anyway. So, and I don't think any administration wants to think that the funding it provides is so inadequate as to lead to rampant self-exploitation and unsustainable policies. So they were really only too happy to have these guidelines that we established through conversations with the board amongst itself, with the community at large, with our colleagues in other fields, to holistically approach the issue. And frankly, you know, we have it a lot easier in the performing arts than in many of the other venues. I mean, the visual arts, or project spaces, those have which are in many ways project spaces or postmodern galleries or post-dramatic galleries. It's just completely different economics and financial models. And it's great that we have the minimum fee limits, but they're certainly not universally respected or provided yet. They're an aim, and in many cases, and certainly with the best programs, they exist 100%. With the programs that are squeezed, there are many different, you know, you'll still find people fudging the budgets. Okay, cool. Well, I'll put in 2 weeks of set design, even though it's obviously going to take 6 weeks, et cetera, et cetera. Again, it's an improvement, and we understand it's a step-by-step process, and it won't ever be fully realized until the total amount of funding available matches what the community needs. And of course, we're still, for the vast majority of things we're talking about with the minimum fee limit, we're talking about projects through this individual project funding program I mentioned earlier. It's the primary funding instrument for the projects in our community each year. And again, it's at least 450 applications for 30 to 35 productions. So all those other applications that aren't those 30 or 35, well, they get zero. And so their maximum fee limit is also zero because they don't have the budget to do the work. And I mean, then we get into this shadow side of it. And this is something that as an operator of a small venue, I actively work against. I generally will not say yes to anyone trying to fully produce without an adequate budget, because without an adequate budget, the only way I can pay them is to do a profit sharing based on our box office. So it'll be a 60-40 split of a 4-show run. So again, unless I'm dealing with a solo artist who wears every single hat, in which case that can be good. They can earn, they can earn up to 800, 1,000 euros a night, depending on the size of the audience, and that's with their cut in. But the second we're dealing with but with any kind of contemporary independent performing arts with more than 3 people working on it, no, it's not sustainable. It becomes beer money, which just isn't the way that professionals should be paid for their work. So we're still working very hard to figure out how to transform it from that and how to make sure that everyone that would like to be able to create work has a way to do it without having to work for beer money.
But the way we advocated for it in the beginning, and what was very fortunate, was that in 2015, that's when we first developed that paper, also a national Mindestlohn, a national minimum salary, was implemented by the German government. That only counts for employed workers. And this helped us to argue. So we came with a clear proposition, most important stuff, a clear proposition that has been negotiated amongst the community saying, we want this piece of paper. Second, hey, you guys have just implemented a minimum salary for everybody in the country. Why should we not get that just because we are self-employed, freelance? No, we also need that. We are talking about social standards. We are not kept by those social standards. All the arguments that count for you to implement the minimum salary also count for us. So please, let's do this. That's that was one of the reasons and the arguments that helped. But yes, and this is interesting what you said, Daniel, because one of the major problems that came with it and one of the big discussions was, okay, so now if everybody is going to get paid twice or 3 times as much as before, and the entire budgets of the funding pots do not grow, then by Adam Riese logic, it's only going to be 20% of the productions that we are going to be able to produce, or much less. And so it is, if you are fighting for a minimum fee, it is necessary to also fight for an increase in budgets. And it took a lot of guts, actually. And I want to mention her, Janina Benduski, who is the program director of the projects of LAFT, and who has been very active in loads of the advocacy that has been done. She was one of the people together with the board who really said, okay, we're going to take this risk also against our own community, and we are going to fight for an increase in budget, even though we do not know, for an increase in fees, even though we do not know if the budgets in generally will rise, trusting that they are going to have to do that on the political side. And it worked. It worked many places. And today the minimum fee model is it's been implemented in most of the 16 German states. After Berlin was the first one, were the first ones to do it. And also several European countries are looking at that and trying to implement it. But talking about all these things, maybe you want to ask us, or maybe we should talk a little bit more about the Russian situation and what is interesting for you guys, or how things are applicable.
Yes, I'm also interested in how to say we always talk about our demands. I mean, about artistic demands toward those who can share with us money. But also, I'm interested. What do you think about up-to-date situation? I mean, what are the reasons for independent artists now to be in art, to do art? I mean, to be useful for society, or to make Berlin attractive for tourists, or to improve some social situation in outskirts, or with migrants, or these hot issues, social.
Art
or
has no
something...
purpose. Art cannot have a political purpose ascribed. Art does all the political purposes you're asking for, but you will never get me to tell you which it is.
Mm-hmm.
My work has a huge basis in socio-political issues, and I think we're living in a world right now that is increasingly pluralistic. Old boundaries, divisions, and models are falling away, in some places more than others. The Federal Republic of Germany, with its 84 million inhabitants, is now the second largest immigrant nation in the world. And one thing that the performing arts seem to do quite well is they seem to provide a platform for communities to come together, to see themselves, and to hold a vigorous self-discussion. And one thing that is much more common within the independent performing arts than it is with the city and municipal theaters or the repertory and ensemble theaters is self-identity, is providing places, because if you look at the repertory and ensemble theaters, they are in many ways overwhelmingly white, dominated overwhelmingly by straight men, overwhelmingly performing plays written by straight men, providing only a very small aspect of discourse and allowing one small demographic to shape the entire course of conversation. And one thing that is so affirming for me personally about the independent performing arts is that you see all of the communities in their entire rainbow of expressions getting together. It provides a huge amount of inspiration for members of minority communities who do not see themselves represented in mainstream culture, seeing themselves given places to come together to affirm their very existences. And this is something I believe in very strongly and very passionately. And I think it's a very large reason why I've dedicated myself to this community, or in a very real way, these communities. And it stands for much more beyond that, but something that is very, very pronounced is identity politics and opportunities for communities that are otherwise rendered invisible to find ways to come together, to be solidary, to be stronger together than they are apart.
Okay, maybe I want to say more than just that one sentence I said, because there is, of course, more to it. The answer I gave, saying I will not tell you what the purpose of art is one that, of course, refers to the freedom of art. And when we were talking in the context of advocacy, and we're talking in the context of how do art and politics collaborate, or are art and politics able to collaborate? And in that context, it's very important to fight for the freedom of art and to not make the politicians think that the artists are their little communication hand throw who can be used in order to do their propaganda. Artists need to be free, and the topics discussed and the things happening on the stages cannot be determined from a political side. Just as one thing, I think all the things that Daniel said, they happen, and they are important and interesting to me a lot. If I would give a more sociological answer to the question, if I'm going out of the advocacy discussion and into the scientific sphere, and you'd ask me what is it that contemporary art does for society, I mean, it's what it always has done. It offers an opportunity of a second layer of observation. Usually we are stuck in routines and in everyday lives in all different fields of our everyday life, from the family, the relationship, to the job, the systems of economy, the systems of politics, the system of international collaborations. All these things are ruled by routines. We're just doing things. And while you're doing things, it's hard to take an outside view. It's hard to be critical. It's hard to see what you're doing wrong. So for me, art has, just as media, or just as media, basically the job to look at the routines of everyday life and to show where there could be intersections, where you could take a right where people usually take a left, where you could think differently and try something new where people always do the same over and over again, to put the finger where it hurts so people notice and realize. And this is, and I don't think that there's so much difference today than there was, maybe 30 years ago. And I don't think there's so much difference between the independent sector and the state theater sector in Germany when it comes to that task. Just, I feel that our current times require more flexibility and require different structures to really address the issues and the problems that hurt than many of the state theaters does. So I think they're doing it a little bit better.
Yeah, I can add a little bit to that again. And I mean, one point where I would disagree, I don't feel that the repertory and ensemble theaters in any way, shape, or form express, address, or explore the issues faced by a huge majority of the new society. And that's something that the independent arts are able to do much more, because those are the practitioners.
Are you gonna make me argue for them now?
Well, it's a systemic problem. And I can't tell you the number of times that I've had conversations in the last 8 years where I'm looking for performers for represent a certain demographic, and I'm told I won't be able to find trained actors or trained whomever because they don't exist. Whereas it's a systemic problem that can only be changed generationally, because it's not until Afro-Germans or Turkish Germans or any other kind of new hyphenated German are provided access to the training programs and taken as fully fledged just German members of society before that they'll be able to tell their own stories and see themselves on stage. But again, this is socio-political. It's fine. It is something that we do, and I dare say it's something that we do a lot better, because I do not see anything to do with gay communities, trans communities, in many ways, migrant communities, worker communities. I don't see that. I see in the state theaters, I see productions of plays primarily from the Western canon. I see them really beautifully used as social dialogue with mainstream society. I like it. I mean, I'm a white guy from the United States who's lived in Germany for 20 years. I'm part of the privilege of that privileged minority. And I studied theater, and I like to see what happens if you don't just do Ibsen because it's a cool play. I like to see what happens if you radically muck with the play, trusting that I know it. But that doesn't do a lot for neighbors of mine who come from a lot less privileged circumstances and also want to congregate within the realm of art the way it's worked, at least in Western theater since the ancient Greeks, blah, blah, blah. I don't need to get polemic, but I think that is something that we do. And I think another thing that happens with that is, I mean, as Thomas said, art doesn't need to justify itself. And I think the point that I wanted to get to for a little bit, another piece of privilege we have making the work that we're allowed to make here in Berlin is we're allowed to do it freely. Our government gives us the money. The government itself doesn't choose who gets the money. The government appoints jury members who are experts primarily from our community, asks us to submit lists of people who they can contact who would be willing. And you are able to do incredibly system critical work with government money. 4 years ago, they gave my theater 50,000 euros to produce a play that was that was about the murder of an African immigrant by the police in the city of Dessau. It doesn't get much more system critical than that, and they funded it. And that's, I mean, I feel like to have this conversation, we have to acknowledge that, because even in the, and I don't know what even in the United States means anymore, but maybe for what it might have meant 4 years prior to now, or 20 years prior to now, or never, that wouldn't have been possible. There is no independent arts funding in the United States. And I just feel like, as representatives of the best, probably the best funded independent arts community in Germany, we need to just take 1/2 of a second and say, we have freedoms that many other independent communities throughout Europe and beyond don't have. And that's part, I think that's part of it too, because as Thomas said, very rightfully so, arts, obviously shouldn't be the mouthpiece or propaganda. And we're in the fortunate position that no one is telling us or thinking that we should be. And if those political winds blow in a different direction, and I'm thinking of the party that I choose not to name because I don't like saying its name out loud, if they were to ever actually win, that would be a situation we'd find ourselves in. And I hope that I never have to experience it.
Christina, what do you think? And Christina?
Sorry. We are in very different situation. I mean, historically. And I think that German authority and Germany as a country is an example of conscious care of authorities about art, not because they like art, but because they understood and realized how important through art to resolve or to delete probably some social hot problems. I think they are very pragmatically and clever, and we have not such situation at all with our authorities. They don't understand, and they didn't understand how important to provide some independent work for this, solving of some social tension. We have not such experience. It's not our tradition, unfortunately.
But
so we are.
Sorry for interrupting.
No, it's okay. I mean that's why probably this is the reason why Russian artists in general, probably now it's changed, but before Russian artists don't have this understanding of social responsibility. We don't have such aims, of art. We're just about art, about this vertical, abstract and universal art, but not about some definite communication, for example, with local communities or with some problem places in your city. It's just very rare examples of our radical experimental works now among young people.
But you asked us, why do you think contemporary art is necessary? So why do you think contemporary art is necessary?
Because art, as you told, and I agree with you, is the tool for understanding our present and our future. So it's very useful. It's a beautiful thing, but also it's very useful to understand the time where you live. It's the most точное, tiny or sharp. Accurate, thank you. Instrument for this. So it's very important for authorities to keep it and to support it.
Yeah,
it's pragmatic.
I would also like to add something, that all the topic about relationships with the government is really tricky for us, because they don't really want to hear our voices, our critical voices, as we see. Now we have this ridiculous case of Serebrennikov, who was in prisons because he went independent, and he would like to be independent and critical towards government. So young artists are afraid to say what they want to say, because it's really easy to get to prison. It's just like you can me myself preparing since childhood to be in prison, because I understand that I'm really critical person, and it's so when you dance in clubs, when you just go in taxi, when you trying to articulate and to be critical towards representation of women's body, as in case now with Yulia Tsvetkova, she's activist who trying to articulate that women bodies are okay, and she's now persecuted by doing propaganda, pornography and homosexual propaganda. She I don't know how to say in English, so 6 years in prison, that's what they want to her now. So it's this is makes so problematic all the relationship with the state. And also I would like to comment that speaking of minimal wage in state, we have like it's really ridiculously low, so it's under $2,000. So it's just ridiculous for everyone who live in big cities, and I guess in not only in big cities but in Russian, the whole Russia. So it's really it's really sad to hear from you that this is the first step that we should do, because it's evident that we should do something else. But maybe Christina, you can comment. I know that, for example, Theater Doc and Center of Meyerhold, they have some productive relationship with the theater, because, for example, as I know, Meyerhold Center is the platform for independent artists. So, and they have governmental budgets for it, and this is the circumstances. This is the reason they have it, because they go to government and say that, hey, we are independent theater, give us money, please. Maybe you know it's better than me how it was.
Meyerhold Center is the city theater, but without artists, without troupe, without cast, only with the staff. And they have special focus on young, not only independent. There is no focus, but on young experimental artists. So they do open call and invite everybody for applying. And if you win, you get the space, rehearsal hours, and assistance from technical part of the Meyerhold Center, and they help you. They provide your production, and then they run it and sell the tickets. So this is they have this budget for the whole year, but it's because of their choice of artistic director and director of Meyerhold Center. They would like to support young artists and interesting projects. So it's not because the states would like, but because they would like. It's their choice. Probably this is the only example in Moscow when the state venue can invite you and provide your production. Even if you are not professional, or you have no this diploma from Theater Institute, or you should defend your project.
kind of want to react to what Daria, what you have said, because it's I started this conversation today saying I do not know how comparable the two situations we are in are, and the stories you tell, and these are not the only stories. I know others from the past, and they're very big cases of critical artists being suppressed, or then we just have an entirely different situation. And I am so humble and impressed by what you do, because it is really an entire, it's also a fight in Germany, but the consequences are not as severe. It always used to be a fight, and back in the day, the worst thing that could happen is that you turn unemployed, and then you get unemployment money. Okay. It's really a different situation. And there is one report that I would like to mention. Can you tell me, is Russia part of the United Nations? Yes, no? Of the UNO? Yes, of course. I think so. I mean, it's 193 states and all major ones are part of it.
Probably. I don't remember. Yes, Alyosha?
Yeah. Okay, because there is something called the 1980s recommendation. Say again?
OON мы состоим, да. So we are in union, sorry.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you, Alexei.
There's something called the 1980 recommendation concerning the status of the artists. It's from the United Nations, this conglomerate, global body of 193 states who agreed on a paper saying that artists need to have enough money to survive. Artists need to have the opportunity to travel. Artists need to be able to produce without government interference and restriction. And I think that Russia has signed that paper too. So maybe that helps. And actually, then there has been just last year a study. I'd have to research or check up who published it. I do not know. It's also been published by the UNESCO, United Nations Cultural Organization, UNESCO, that controls these recommendations. It was a global study where the researchers engaged with NGOs all around the world trying to figure out, is this really happening? What the people have signed up to do in 1980. And I'm sure there's a chapter or some information about Russia to be found. Give me 1 second, literally. I know where it's at.
Russia doesn't care, I'm sure, about this paper or what is it?
It's also funny that we start to talk about UN, because I think like a couple years ago there was this viral video of Russian delegation in UN, and like he like screaming at the colleague from another country and say like, "Look at my eyes." So like it's really Russia in UN and some. Yeah, maybe it's not. Sorry, it's again. Yeah.
No, just I found it. This is what the study is called. If you want to research it, that's the
conditions for artists.
And I mean, I think one of the reasons why all of us have chosen to come together this Sunday night is to acknowledge the gap between the utopias and the current realities and ask what we can do to bridge those gaps. Is there more specific things that Thomas and I can tell you to help you in your steps to begin to bring your community together and organize?
Well, I would like maybe you can just share your experience, because what we experiencing now in Russia, and also I mentioned it before we started, that there is no much interest to get in union, like for performance artists, from performing artists. So like, it's like, I feel like people don't really understand how important, because first of all, people are afraid to be activists, because like you have this all examples, and me, like I'm really afraid of it. So I'm afraid to go to demo, for example, because I know it's like in Russia, really it's going like happen something. Anyway, so that's a kind of question is, or like maybe your experience, like how to bring to people like this understanding.
Well, LAFT certainly started very, very small. And one of the most important things to say is that it includes members working in all of the professions in the performing arts. So managers, venue operators, producers, directors, production managers, designers, performers, everybody. We continue to notice that we have fewer self-designated performers, particularly independent performers, because we don't know. We feel or we hear that maybe performers or actors think that we have a little bit less to offer them because, while we can perhaps bring about minimum fee limits, we can't necessarily get them acting jobs. So one of the things is our association consists not just of individuals, but very importantly, groups, collectives, and ensembles, which, I would go so far as to say the majority of the performers in our community belong to groups, collectives, or ensembles. The venues themselves are part of it, as often joining as venues. We have individual memberships, but we also have group memberships or institutional memberships. So we've tried to reach out to as many different people as possible, or different classifications and groupings of people as possible. That's very important, and to go beyond the individual. And even then, still, it's baby steps. And we're so excited about this, we just got to 400 members, and this is 13 years in. Mm-hmm. And that's another thing, and this is something we haven't talked about yet, and I have to join Thomas in just lifting this invisible hat that's right here in my head to Janina Benduski, who, it's incredible what she achieves, and I think most of us are pretty sure she never sleeps. But 8 years ago, we got the Performing Arts Program that's supported with money from the EU. It's like €2.5 million a year, and we've gotten the funding continuously now. I think it's renewed every 2 years through 2 different grants. It's allowed LAFT to formally employ 20 different people part-time, many of whom are producing artists, which gives them a steady source of income, some amount of insurance, and still 20 hours a week out of their working week to dedicate to art. And everything that we offer is LAFT, be it the many amazing things in the Performing Arts Program, which are a mentoring program, a theater scoutings program that creates new communication formats for audiences to discuss work after seeing it, an information center that provides comprehensive advisement, an annual conference called the Industry Get Together, which is probably the largest conference of the independent performing arts in Germany, a central point of contact and touring office, providing information about those things, a rehearsal space platform that centralizes and digitizes people offering spaces and people searching for spaces. All that stuff, you don't have to be a member to use it. It's all free. It's all for you. The same with the LAFT newsletter, which, I can't even keep track of how many newsletters we send these days. It's a lot. And every single one is chock full of grant deadlines, festival deadlines, funding applications, everything else. That went, I think, a huge way to starting to build a self-identity with the community. And frankly, I think people, after a while of like just taking advantage, of benefiting from this stuff for free, think to themselves, oh, well, maybe I'll join up and be a member, because then I pay my dues. and then it supports a little bit. It's not a lot, you know, discounted individual membership is 35 euros and full price is 70.
But this is not a realistic option for you right now. This is nothing that is close to where you are. I mean, it is amazing. You're absolutely right. And it does exactly that. It gathers all the people and they identify with LAFT and its programs. But I think if you're about to start a community, what is important is to have a regular meeting that is open for anybody to come, maybe once every 3 months, once every half a year. What is also important is to include everybody, but not to expect everybody to participate. There's something we call it the dictatorship of the active. Anybody is welcome to come and participate and be a part of it. But those who are there and who act, they act and they do things, and they do things in the name for others because the others had a chance to take part. If you are getting engaged in trying to get everybody on board and being part in the strategic development of your organization, actively you will lose years of time trying to talk to one another. You need to take each other serious, and invite everybody to always be a part, but also make sure that you move forward. I think those things are important. And then think of small. So this is the one part. Just say, okay, first thing for an organization to become an organization is to have a regular meeting. Second thing for us to gain a voice might be to become many. But then again, I don't know Russia, and I don't know Russia's politics. Maybe what I'm saying is really, I'm really careful about that. Another thing that we've done, and that was before the performing arts program was there was this board, there was the association, and people wanted advice. They needed somebody to tell them, how do I write an application? So the newcomers would ask the association, hey, can you help me? They wanted somebody to tell them about touring. They wanted them to have more meetings so they could network and so on. And at some point, the board was completely overwhelmed by trying to confront all these demands. And they really wanted to help, but it was just too much. But to even get to this point, you know, to know, hey, we are the experts. You are welcome to come and ask us. We want everybody to be part of this movement. We're doing this because we believe in it and it's necessary. I think that's a great start. And then the performing arts program always had this idea of from the community for the community. We are trying to figure out things that we could also do without money. For example, the mentorship program is something that could be applied with very little money, where people who have a lot of experience in the community say, hey, you know what, for the next 2 years, I'm going to find one newcomer and I meet him once a month for a coffee. And we talk about his projects. So he has somebody he can ask his questions to. That doesn't necessarily need a big budget, but could be a small starting point. Or to say the board is offering application help one Saturday a month because they want to develop a community. It's these things might help. You're absolutely right, Daniel. You need, providing service, providing something useful to the others definitely helps to attach them to you. But at the same time, it's also something that needs that is work, and work should be paid. And this work is usually not paid.
No, and I mean both my positions on the board as well as the coalition, I mean, they're completely voluntary. And that's, I mean, I say to myself, just obviously, but, and that's why the performing arts program is a professionalization. But, if we turn now to the questions of self-organization, I think Thomas's suggestion, I mean, in order to self-organize, you have to come together. And I completely agree. I call it the do-ocracy. Those who are there do, because you just, that's very important. And I think the other thing that's very important is to understand the political framework in which you're in. We are an advocacy group and not a union, because we don't have the power or the clout that a union has. We can protest or demonstrate, but we can't shut down because that will not have an effect. And we have the privilege and the benefit of having conversation partners. We achieve the same things in many ways as a union would. The minimum fee limit is certainly something that a union could achieve, but by being an advocacy group and giving the decision makers one entity to talk with, as opposed to 50 different individuals, it lets us get our foot in the door and have a conversation. Even if it doesn't end with exactly what we want, it's much more effective than if every one of those 20 individuals wrote a letter for their own self-interests. And I think it's understanding as well that it's very much step by step, and maybe it's very good to have both short-term as well as long-term goals. And for morale, I think there's nothing better than achieving a short-term goal or a couple of them in a row to give yourself the self-confidence, also to bring in other people who see you starting to get results in order to gain the necessary strength, because it's a long march to achieve the longer-term goals. I mean, LAFT as an entity has been doing this, like I've said, for 13 years, and
13?
in some ways we've made it far, and in other ways we're still at the beginning.
And yeah.
Another thing that's important, and I can say this from the coalition, because I'll tell you this, right now in the year and a half, 2 years I've been on the board, we've had very, very, very few internal disagreements. Very, 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 very few. We are, there's a 7-person, for like a 10 or 11 person body, there's 7 so-called formal elected board members, and there are 4 or 5 like myself who are so-called co-opted. We don't disagree with each other. Where the disagreements happen is in the coalition. And we need to find ways to disagree with each other constructively and say, okay, visual arts, they really don't want this right now. And the other 6 or 7, as well as the members that don't belong to associations, they want this. How do we do this to move everyone forward without working against or hurting the interests of the one who's behind? So patient diplomacy and compromise are essential, as well as presenting a unified front. Because if the people that if the decision makers see that you're not united, it's very easy to crumble what you've brought together. So there needs to be ways, like in the coalition, we have an entire structure. We've thought about codified ways of determining what happens if we can't come to an agreement. So it's like, okay, if 3 different times we raise an issue, we can't make it to a conclusion, then we can hold it to a majority vote, but we can still only move forward on that if we are certain that the interests of the group that is opposing aren't harmed by it. And they sort of have to also agree that they're not being harmed by it, which, yeah, sure, slows stuff down, but at the same time maintains unity.
It's a democratic process. This is actually something that we are doing a lot, and also like Daniel said, the board consists of 7 people. Those 7 people are voted for. There is a general assembly of all the members who are deciding who will speak for them. Before we, like in the beginning stages of the large projects of LAFT, which is the Performing Arts Program and the Performing Arts Festival, anything we did, we would have roundtable discussions with the community about new formats developed, about new directions to go, and we would always try to include the community in order to be sure that we're that we're doing something that is needed. And we are very open about exchange also. These positions in an association, they are often temporary and they are not a lifelong thing. They're also voluntary. Like Daniel said, he's doing this on top of his job of running the English Theater Berlin. So this is one way to interview the community. Another way to interview the community is that those jobs that we can give out for the performing arts program or for running the festivals. Anything, everybody who works for the association is only working there part-time. We have no full-time employees. And with the other part of the time, they're doing something else. They're working anything, independent. I'm an independent researcher on top, and I production manager, curator in different scenarios. And so is everybody else. We've got performers, we've got technical people, we've got communication workers. That also ensures that we do not drift away from what is needed within the community, and that we stay a part of it and stay with it. I think it's, yeah, these are just some examples of how to think community. I think, for me, this work, and it is running the Performing Arts Festival is half of my, or co-running it with others, is half of my time of my life. It's my job also, but I also see it as a service to the community and as being part of something of a larger movement that I really am motivated to contribute to, and that I do not take for granted of it being always my job. It's something. It's a project that happened right now that we have developed, and it's good because it helps the independent performing arts to grow, and it helps enlightenment thought around democracy, and that's why I'm doing it. I think it's and if it stops, it stops, and then I'll do something else, more work closer to art maybe again.
I mean, I think a big part of it as well is with the advocacy work, it's also very much about diplomacy. I think, frankly, and I've said that, I've said this in the bodies I work in as well. I think that LAFT is much more effective at diplomacy than the coalition. And that's something that I spent a lot of my time in the coalition trying to work towards better, because neither of us, the independent performing arts, neither the independent performing arts nor the greater independent arts community are coming from positions of power or equality vis-a-vis the decision makers, which is one reason why we're not a union. Now, there certainly are unions of performing artists in Germany, but they can actually bring about a shutdown, and a shutdown that would be, I dare say, felt on a higher perceptible level. And nothing against my communities that I think are vital and essential, but because we lack those powers to take a different example, let's say train conductors. When their unions are unhappy and they call a strike, the trains don't run, and every single person notices that. They have a certain amount of power they can exercise. So it's more effective for us to be an advocacy group because we can have conversations, we can apply pressure in more subtle ways. We can do things, we can hold demonstrations, and we have. I'm talking more with the coalition now, but when the coalition holds a demonstration, certainly members of all the associations also take part. We can get signatures and do petitions. We can go to parliamentary hearings and show presence or even testify. All of these things. But it's through diplomacy that we are invited to have a seat at the table, and through diplomacy, and it goes both ways. And to an administrator, we show them we understand that their job is difficult. We understand that everyone is yelling at them, the artists, the organizers, the politicians. Everyone wants more than they can give, and at the very least, they can talk to us to have a respectful, straightforward conversation that may be a part compromise to help both of our sides get what they want. With the politicians, now, when they're in power, we always know that after the election is before the next election. So every single politician working in every single field is always thinking about that next election because, not all the time, but in some cases, an election is not for life. And if that's the case, then they've got to run again. And, this is something I'm being very frank here. This is something I bear in mind with everyone that I work with. And I really, really like and respect a lot of the politicians that I have the privilege of working with. They're awesome human beings. And in this case, they also think that their party will benefit from working with our community and with us. And frankly, it does work. If I get the citizenship that I would like, there's definitely a party that I'm planning on joining. And it's due to a lot of things, but it's certainly also influenced by the way that I see them viewing our community and taking it seriously. So these diplomatic tools, I think, also go a long way in our advocacy work, helping the decision makers. In our case, it's the cultural administrators paired with the cultural politicians. And they are in opposition to each other a lot of the time. So we have a position sort of in the middle and sort of have to serve both sides in a manner that in turn benefits us again. So I hope that's helpful in a certain sense. I feel like that's relatively clear. We're not a union because we don't have the clout to do what a union can do, but we are an advocacy group because we can very concretely influence future decisions that affect our community.
May I ask if there is a time limit on our conversation, just for planning purposes?
Yeah, I
We
guess
planned for 2 hours, but
yeah, I guess we can. I have
7 minutes.
I have one question that I haven't still chance to ask. I've seen I've seen the paper by you, Thomas. It's research on independent performing arts in Europe. There are a small text from you at the beginning, and it says that one of the aims of such association should be multi-annual, long-term structural funding for artists. And my question is about what is the specificity because you, Daniel, have already somehow talked about it. What is the specificity of helping for freelancers? Because really anything would be changed if all the artists would not do what they do. We have no there are no I don't know how to say, we cannot use all these unions tools now because we are not on we don't want on fabrics and because we live in these neoliberal conditions and all of us are freelancers. What we have and this is the one question, and the other is if you talk about this long-term structural funding, I would like to introduce the initiative that our friends initiate. It's like a basic income for artists. They have a letter for government to for this proposal to have some ideas how to fund artist works in between contracts. So this is like French model because they should pay more to government, and then they have something
in between
to help in return. So maybe you have some ideas or examples.
Yeah, the question of long-term structural funding is something that has been taken up in this research because it compares 8 different countries, and the research for the first time showed that it is something that is very rare in the performing arts, that people have planning securities, and there are just few of those countries who have these long-term funding programs. And that's something that all of the communities are longing for. By nature, independent work is project-based, and it's always tricky to figure out how to balance the things, the different funding tools against one another. I don't, it sounds like a solution for everything, but I don't think it is. I mean, here long-term funding is something that is given out very restrictively, not to many people now, to also not to many or every institution. And by nature, independent work is something that has to deal with planning insecurity, and that is project-based because it is always renewing itself and reacting on a certain circumstance. It's got, the moment where you sell yourself off for a long time, then you also lose some of your freedom, usually. And so and people are at different steps in careers, and there are also developments. We talk a lot about solidarity, and we talk about taking one another alongside and being like supportive of each other. But of course, there's a difference between somebody who has established himself over a long time period, who has built an audience, who has built international connections or connections all around, and who is able to really work independently and has found a place in the world and is reacting on a demand or who's necessary towards somebody who's just starting out and who hasn't done one project yet. Of course, those people cannot receive maybe they can. I don't know, but there are differences. But I mean, and now we're in a neoliberal discussion. I'm very careful on how what I'm gonna say now, because you introduced the idea of a basic income, which is a whole different discussion that we are having on a society-wide level in Germany. The discussion is there as well. People think about a basic income, not for artists, but for everybody. And I have a position on that. I have never thought about whether I think it's a good idea to have a basic income for artists. I would have to think about it a little bit in order to tell you what my position is.
Now I, for the first time, realized the difference between that independent companies or groups in Russia, which existed for probably last 15 years. And usually they are based in quite small cities. And these individuals, Dasha is the example of such kinds of new artists. They are individuals, but that independent theaters were groups. And all these leaders, when they demanded or look for some money, they would like money for whole group and for their work, but not for himself or for herself. And this is a big difference, I would say. Yes, I realized it now. Thank you.
Okay, we have so many, I don't know, so much to discuss and so many new thoughts maybe come up to us. Maybe it would be nice to have like an article after this talk that we can continue to develop our thoughts, maybe. So I would propose to finish it for now. Maybe anyone have something to say as a to finish our talk. And thank you for everyone who participated. Thank you, Thomas and Daniel, that you our guest today, and Christina for being so hospitable. And thank you, Electrotheater. And big thanks to Anna that helps us to translate it to Russian. It's really, really great job. Thank you so much. So And thank you, our audience, also.
I want to thank you first for having us and giving us this platform and so much time and space just to talk about us and ourselves. I hope some of this helps you in your development, and I really want to say that it is impressive. That is impressive what you do, and it really seems to be a continuous process. Already a year ago, we were in conversation for the first time. I've got the feeling that there's really a conversation happening and a strong will to unite and to do something together. And I think, especially in the circumstances that you're working under, it is very admirable, and I hope that you stay with it and that you can make it work. I really, really wish you guys all the best with it.
Thank you very much. And it's interesting that we don't use any public space, only our private and our time. So I think it's more easier to do some things.
And I can only second what Thomas said, and I encourage you to please continue to use this as resources. I feel like I know Thomas well enough to know that he stands fully behind this. So we are both at your service. Anything we can do to help you continue to professionalize your self-organization, it would be our pleasure.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I thank you so much for joining us together today, and that's I think, yeah, I heard some really encouraging things, and yeah, it is also nice to have a contact to people who already in this good situation. I think, yeah, and thank you, Dasha, also for organizing it, actually. Yeah. So
All right.
Yes.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen. Tschüss.
Cheers.
Thank you
Again,
so much.
Real pleasure to chat with all of you.
All right.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
let's keep in
Bye.
touch.
Absolutely. Ciao, ciao.
Thank
Tschüss.
you.
Oh, thank
Ciao.
Thank
you.
you.
Трансляция уже, да, закрылась? Или еще нет?
Все, до свидания. Спасибо Константину за помощь в трансляции.
Да. Just want to